Upon replaying Ghost of Tsushima recently, I thought it'd be a good idea to finally check out the Legends DLC, which was released for free back in October of last year, 3 months after the initial release date. Going into Legends, I had many questions about the mode, as I knew almost nothing about it, besides it was a class-based looter that focused on cooperative gameplay. To begin with, I started off by playing the 9 story missions solo. After that, I spent the rest of my time with Legends playing co-op. The reason I started without co-op was to see if this game mode worked in single player, and although it's a functional experience, it is very much not the intended way to play, as the missions tend to be imbalanced, and this will only get worse and worse as you move into the higher difficulties and survival missions. So if you're planning on playing this, I would highly recommend you get PlayStation Plus in order to access online matchmaking, otherwise you probably won't have a very good time. Thankfully, the community is still alive and well as of February 2021. On top of that, Legends matches you with players all around the world, which really helps out low population regions like Oceania. So I suspect online matchmaking will still be available for months to come, even without the addition of new content. If you clicked onto this video just wanting an answer to, is Legends worth playing in 2021? Well, the answer is yes, and with this also being free content, there is almost no barrier to entry. Well, besides the $10 for PlayStation Plus. For everyone else wanting to know the in-depth details about what is on offer here, stick around for the rest of the review. Lastly, if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving me a like and subscribing. Okay, what do you get if and when you decide to pick up and play Legends? As you boot up for the first time, you'll be pushed into the mandatory tutorial, which shows off the 4 playable classes, and will give you a brief look at what to expect when it comes to mission design. The first class you'll be introduced to will be the Samurai, who focuses on melee combat. Then there's the Hunter, who relies on her trusty bow, the Assassin, who sneaks around and executes unaware enemies, and lastly there's the Ronin, who acts as a support class for the team by healing and resurrecting downed allies. Each of the classes here are unique in their own way. While they all have access to much of the same weapons and equipable gear, like smoke bombs, kunai, different passive charms, and so on, it's their abilities and skill trees that establish the different playstyles. And the different options available here really are unique from one another, but this isn't obvious until the end game, where team comps become the difference between winning and losing, as many of the harder survival missions or raids are won almost exclusively by character abilities and ghost weapons, which are your R1 special items like kunai and black powder bombs, along with the modifiers any given class will be focusing on. For example, a popular samurai build will focus on self-healing through the use of Spirit Pull, an ability that drains health from enemies within their proximity. Or assassins will have 2 different smoke bombs, allowing them to assassinate enemies in the middle of a battlefield, but then will have a passive that lets them re-enter stealth upon a successful kill. Furthermore, each class has 2 or 3 really strong build paths available, so you're not forced to play your Ronin in the same way as somebody else. With all that said, you really need to get to the end game and post level 100 to see the variety in class builds here. Because for my first 15 hours or so, I tentatively experimented with all 4 classes, and none of them stood out to me. I saw them as too similar to each other, with the Samurai being the worst of the bunch, as his beginning kit is nearly identical to Jin's in the base game. Except it's a stripped back version, removing the 4 different combat stances, and only having a couple ghost weapons, which caused me to be a bit hostile towards the decision to make this a class-based looter. But after I'd played for about 10 to 15 hours and had the Samurai class at level 20, which is past the point of unlocking all their abilities, and also around gear level 80, I started to enjoy the hunt for loot and the different styles of gameplay it would open up. See, the gear you unlock here is the character builds, it's not really the classes themselves. Yes, you tailor your build around the classes and their abilities, but the actual gear themselves has a lot more impact in how successful you'll be and what you'll be doing. Now, what gear is available to unlock and how does this system work? Because this is nothing like the base game. Every class can equip 2 offensive items, a katana and a bow. Next is a charm with passive effects tied to it, and lastly there are 2 ghost weapons. So that's 5 slots you have available to create your build with. Just so no one gets the wrong idea, you don't have the option to mix and match items here. You are locked into this structure down to the point where there are ghost weapons that can only be equipped into slot 1 and likewise for slot 2. Different pieces of gear will also be tied to one specific class, but this works much more as a debuff rather than the item coaxing you into a specific build path. Alternatively, you can simply reroll the stats on the item to remove the class specific modifier. A basic build for an assassin would be to completely focus on stealth damage and cooldown reduction. This works by the assassin having a smoke bomb as his basic ability, allowing him and his allies to go invisible for a brief moment of time. There's also a smoke bomb item that can be used as well, allowing for 2 different options to go invisible, opening up more opportunities for assassinations. Now, reroll the stats and modifiers on the items to grant high stealth damage and a unique passive called Vanish, which pops the smoke bomb effect again if you're under that effect while getting a stealth kill. Pair all of this with the class-specific abilities like extra stealth damage, faster assassinations, and another point in Vanish, which stacks with the item modifier. You now have an assassin that can one-shot almost any trash mob, and you can go invisible 6 times in a row by the 2 resets of Vanish and the 2 different smoke bombs. Okay, that was a lot of explaining and technical details, but that's about the depth of what any build here is capable of, and that's only one build on the assassin, in which there are definitely multiple different builds per class. Lastly, on the topic of loot and class progression is the armor and challenges associated with them. All the armor you can unlock here is class specific, meaning the same piece of armor cannot be used on another class. But that's completely fine here, as the armor is only cosmetic. It has no additional defense ratings or gameplay changes. You unlock armor by doing challenges on each class and leveling them up from rank 1 to rank 20. There are also some emotes and sword visual effects packs that are saved across all classes. Most of the things you'll need to do to unlock everything here will come naturally. Very rarely will you be chasing specific challenges to complete, as the requirements typically range between completing a specific mission, surviving the final round of survival on gold difficulty, or by reaching level 20. Perhaps some of the late game cosmetics you'll need to grind for, but this is something a very small percentage of players will need to worry about. The whole cosmetic system here is great. Everything is clearly explained to the player. It's very manageable to unlock each piece, and the designs here actually look amazing. Unfortunately, they added armor sets that look like Kratos from God of War and the Hunter from Bloodborne, but these have since been removed as they were timed exclusives. I wasn't playing when these were released, so I missed out on them, but I really hope they eventually add them back in. To recap quickly, the classes are great and have a lot of variety. While the gear starts out slow, by the end it adds a lot of flexibility to your gameplay, and the cosmetics here are easy to unlock and look fantastic. Okay, that was a lot of praise towards the player side of things, but it's time to talk about something I have a lot more mixed thoughts about. If you watched my original review on the base game, then you would know that how the missions were designed and the lack of variety was one of my biggest complaints with that game. I'm happy to say that Legends has added more variety to the missions, but it's not enough to stop the feeling of repetition. And this is made worse towards the end game, when you start to do gold difficulty survival missions and grinding the nightmare story missions. Let's back up a little bit and explain what types of missions are available here. There are 3 categories. First up are the story missions, of which there are 9, each broken into 3 parts. These require a simple task to be completed, like rescuing a monk or destroying a portal, and then the mission is built upon in the second part, and then again in the third and final part of the mission. These are more or less used to get you into Legends and establish a low-level character, which you can then go forth into survival missions for more rewards and more variety. As I just mentioned, survival missions are the second category, and they follow the basic structure that you'd expect. Survive a certain number of rounds, every 5th round brings in tougher mini-boss enemies, and you can also buy power-ups with the points you collect throughout the mission. Both the story missions and survival missions have 3 difficulty settings: Bronze, Silver, and then Gold. As you go from Bronze to Silver, the enemies will get harder, but you also get better item drops. The same increase in challenge and items continues on with Gold. Finally, there's your late game missions, which are the raids and nightmare difficulty versions of the story missions and survival missions. The most exciting part of all of this is the raid, which is divided into 3 chapters. These are sprawling levels that require teamwork, patience, and knowledge to succeed. Broken down into platforming, puzzles, and horde battles, the raid brings everything together that Legends has been about. That's all the missions Legends has available. The final section will go into great detail about all of my issues with this structure. Okay, back to criticism. The story missions here start to feel extremely repetitive very quickly. While I love the addition of new mission objectives, they don't feel quite unique enough from the main game, and they also repeat themselves 3 times over in each of the 9 missions. Since many of the cosmetics are also tied to completing the story missions multiple times over, the sense of dread continues to grow. The most fun I had during these story missions was when I was doing the nightmare versions, because you're at the end game and you've played them enough times, so you begin to speedrun each of them and complete them in as little as 10 minutes. The survival missions also have the same issues. Starting out on Bronze difficulty, you're tasked with defending the 3 points around whatever map for 15 rounds. This typically takes around 30 minutes with a level appropriate character. But moving to Silver creates more challenging enemies as you would expect, but also ups the round counter to 20, and then in Gold it's raised again to 25, the latter taking around 45 minutes to complete. 45 minutes of the same wave-based gameplay, on a map that you would have played on multiple times. This is ridiculous. It gets extraordinarily boring, and if you leave early, you don't get rewarded with any items or experience. So if you've played for 30 minutes and you have to go, you've just wasted all that time. This same issue persists through every mission in the game. You have to finish or lose to get items, which isn't as much of an issue for the shorter story missions, but it is extremely frustrating when you get to the raids. What made me completely write off the survival missions in the endgame was during my first attempt at Nightmare difficulty. My group was getting very close to finishing after 45 minutes, with just a few more rounds until we were done. A couple enemies decided to glitch out and not properly aggro, and just stood idle on the edge of the map. As we began to attack them, their health would instantly return to full. After trying to kill them for a minute, one of my party members left, just for the enemies to re-aggro and become killable. In every other mission and difficulty excluding the raids, you can matchmake in the middle of a match to find players. This is done so if you're in a group of 3, you can find a 4th to finish a round of survival. But this isn't available in Nightmare, and this being the most challenging difficulty, it's practically impossible to beat without a group of 4. This means once my team member left, we were stuck on round 19 of 25 with just 3 of us. Not being able to find a 4th player, we then lost a couple rounds later, 50 minutes down the drain. What made me never want to touch Nightmare Survival again after that, and just survival missions overall, is just because it's not worth it in the end. The reward system is broken. You're not rewarded enough for playing survival. It's way more efficient to grind Nightmare story missions to get gear and experience. A 45-minute survival round can reward you with like 5 or 6 items, whereas a gold story mission can give you 4 items in just 15 minutes. That's like a 200% increase in items drop, plus you don't have to deal with the frustration of being stuck in a lobby for close to an hour. Okay, that was a lot on survival. I think it's a completely fine mode in the beginning, but it doesn't scale nicely at all into the endgame, and that's a real shame as it's 1/3 of the content available. Luckily, the raids are very well done. While I have the least experience with them, I feel they did what they were meant to do. Massive 4-player missions that can take up to a couple hours to complete with a variety of different challenges and obstacles to overcome. An additional reward is also available for completing each individual raid chapter once per week, as well as the Nightmare story mission and survival mission. This helps to give you extra incentive to play all the different content each and every week. To quickly recap before we finish up this review. Story missions are okay with some more variety, but quickly grow stale and repetitive. Survival missions start out good, but become boring and repetitive again once you reach the endgame. Furthermore, the time it takes you to complete isn't worth the reward given to you. Each raid chapter is unique and awesome, while also providing a substantial challenge. That's basically all there is to talk about. I didn't mention the story at all throughout the review, although I mentioned story missions many times, and that's because the story just didn't interest me. It's not connected to Jin's story at all. I even hesitate to call it a story, as any plot points or character is revealed only through voiceover or extremely brief cutscenes. None of this is a bad thing though. Any semblance of a story or character here is just to give some context to what you'll be doing in any given mission. Visuals, audio, and the rest of the presentation is exactly what you'd expect after seeing the beauty of the base game. Many areas are striking due to their colour palette. This is far more muted in colour, but has bright, vivid pops of red throughout the landscapes. It's a phenomenal looking DLC too, and the art design is as top notch as always. Something I always forget to write into the gameplay sections is enemy variety. Just like the base game, what is here is fantastic. Legends adds even more enemies to fight, and some that are hugely distant from what we've seen so far. So kudos to Sucker Punch once again for their imaginative enemy design and tremendous variety. To finish this all off, I wanted to quickly mention that all this is free. All the gear you find and use, all the cosmetics you can show off, all the classes and their abilities, all the story missions, survival missions, and raids. It would have been so easy to add in microtransactions and ask for a few dollars for an armor set, or locking off 2 characters behind a paywall, but Sucker Punch didn't. I really have to thank them because this is an extremely generous package. The base game was already well worth the price tag alone, but then they went on to add an additional game mode that could have been its own separate game entirely. I'm quite disappointed this went under the radar last year, because it's truly something special, and I urge everyone who owns Ghost of Tsushima to play this. Great job Sucker Punch, and good luck with Ghost of Tsushima 2, because I know it will be every part as good as this.